Welcome to Wheeling, West Virginia. Population around 26,000 or so. West Virginia, of course, a very rugged, mountainous state. One of my favorite states in the entire nation. Wheeling sits in a weird section of West Virginia. It's in that panhandle, so it's snuggled right in between Pennsylvania and Ohio. Now, of course, Wheeling is small enough to where they still have a taxi cab company, which is right over there. To me, that's always a benchmark if you live in a small city, if there's still a functioning taxi cab company in your area. So Wheeling is one of those towns that is having some form or another of a revitalization. Out with the old, in with the new. This is a really cool town if you're driving down the 70, whether you're going to the East Coast or you're heading out to the Midwest, just to stop in and check out. There's lots of cool little shops, restaurants. There is a vibe to the city for sure, and it also has its dark side. By the time the 1890s roll around here in Wheeling, West Virginia, this city has been around for almost 100 years, and the population at that time was about 1/3 larger than it is now. 40,000 residents call Wheeling, West Virginia their home. This was a pretty important town back in the days because it being right off of the Ohio River, it was often used as a smallish port town where they would ferry cattle, vegetables, tobacco up and down the Ohio River. And the lands in this area, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, were very fertile for farming. You had the Bloch brothers who had started a tobacco business, and they're doing quite well. As a matter of fact, West Virginia at one point in the 19th century had the most millionaires per capita in the entire nation. Now, it's springtime here in Wheeling, and the cold winter is finally gone. All of the snow has melted, and a young man of German descent, he comes to Wheeling because he wants to settle down and he wants to start a family. This man's name was Joseph Schmidt, or was it Johann Otto, or was it Otto Smith? Whatever the hell his name is, nobody really knows, because this guy changes his name more than most people change their underwear, hopefully. This guy comes into town and he has a little bit of pocket money in his coat. He often carries hundreds of dollars at a time, sometimes even thousands. This guy gets to town, nobody knows him, a fresh face on the dating scene in Wheeling. He gets a room in one of these apartments, hotels, whatever, and one of the first things that he does is he puts an ad in the newspaper in the classified section under the looking for love section. Yeah, this guy is looking for a wife, probably prefer a woman of German descent, but he doesn't really care, because later on that person is gonna find out that the only business that he's really in is the business of murdering you. So that April 1895, a woman reading the Wheeling Gazette sees this ad in the newspaper, and this guy sounds intriguing. A German man looking to wed a wife, settle down, and have children. Now, Caroline Miller Hch, recently widowed, is by herself in this world. She has no children, and who wants to be alone in those days? A woman that was, widowed or single, she was sort of kind of looked down upon a little bit. And it wasn't her fault that her husband Adolf had died on her. He has suffered some form or another of a heart ailment. So she reads the ad and responds. Now, eventually, both Caroline and Joseph, they would meet up. So they meet at whatever cafe, and he says, "Hi, my name is Jacob Huff." And she's like, "Okay, hi, my name is Caroline Hch." And little does Caroline know is that Jacob is not his real name. We don't really know what his real name is, but we do know this. Over the past 5-6 years, this guy has been traveling up and down the East Coast, everywhere from Connecticut down to Washington, D.C., meeting women, marrying them, stealing all of their money from their bank accounts, and sometimes killing them. His favorite way to murder was putting arsenic in their food. And Caroline does not know that this time she's the next intended victim of this serial killing clown. Little did Caroline know that only after a couple months of marriage that her new husband, Jacob, slowly starts to poison her. One day it starts from "my stomach hurts." The next day, stomach hurts a little bit more. Next thing you know, you have a high temperature. You have the worst diarrhea you could ever imagine. And within a few weeks, you're bedridden. And she would continue to suffer a very, very slow, agonizing death until she finally died on her deathbed on June 15th, 1895. The funeral was held right where I'm standing on this off-ramp. This was Redmond Cemetery. It's no longer here. They built this highway. So somewhere under this off-ramp right here is the grave of Caroline Hch, and she's buried next to her first husband, Adolf. And one Jacob Joseph Johann Otto Schmidt Porter Smith, whatever his name is now, he's out of here. Another wife wasted. He depletes her bank account for $900, cashes her life insurance policy for $2,500, sells her house, and he starts heading about a mile away from here to the bank of the Ohio River. A few days after the funeral, a man walking along the bank of this river seen a man's coat that looked like it was in pretty good condition. He picks up the coat and he's looking through the pockets. Maybe he was looking for a wallet to see some identification. He'll return it to the rightful owner. All that was in the coat was a letter written by one Jacob Huff, claiming that he could no longer live without the love of his life, Caroline, and took his own life by jumping into this river right here. Now, little did people know that that letter was a fake. This man had no intentions of harming himself, only the women that he married. His travels would take him 1,000 miles away to Chicago, Illinois. We will continue that story about the infamous Jacob Huff, Johann Otto, whatever name you want to give him, on a future video. It's November 17th, 1977. It's about noontime, and Pauline Flaherty, she's late for her hairdresser appointment. Now, the hairdresser's tapping her toes, looking at her clock, and trying to figure out where the hell is Pauline at. She's always on time. So she rings the Flaherty residence and nobody's answering the phone. So she sends her 12-year-old daughter to 149 North 18th Street to see where Pauline is. Maybe she fell asleep. So her daughter walks from around the corner, makes a right onto this street, and is walking up to the Flaherty residence. She's knocking on the door, and nobody's answering. Being a curious kid, she's a friend of the family. She goes ahead and opens the door. She starts calling out, Pauline, Pauline, Mr. Flaherty. Nobody's answering. Nina? Nothing. She goes upstairs, and in the bedroom is lying Jack Flaherty. He's on the ground. He has some kind of a towel or a blanket covering his head, and there's blood all over it. So she runs down the stairs, back around the corner, and tells her mother what she's seen. They called 911. Wheeling police arrive right to the residence. Used to be right here, no longer here. They knocked it down. And they go through the front door upstairs, and they do indeed find Jack Flaherty, and he's dead. The family had a downstairs apartment for their daughter, 20-year-old Nina Flaherty. She was going to school to be a nurse. They go downstairs to the basement, and they find Nina along with Pauline, 52 years of age. They're both dead. All three members of the Flaherty family had been bludgeoned to death. And it looks like one of the implements that was used to beat the family to death was some kind of a wrench. So immediately, detectives start cordoning off the area, and they're going through all of these houses right here, and they're asking the neighbors, did you hear anything? Did you see anything? Now, one of the first suspects, really only prime suspect that they came up with, was 31-year-old George Anderson. He had worked at the dog track, probably not even 2 miles from here. He had lived at the YMCA, kind of like a flop house at that time, and he was dating their 20-year-old daughter. So they go to the YMCA where he had been living at for the last 3 months, and the detectives tell the manager, we're looking for George Anderson. And they said, well, he's not here. He packed up his stuff and he left. They're talking to one of the residents at the YMCA, and he says, yeah, he told me he was going to Pittsburgh. He had bought one of those Ameripasses that Greyhound used to sell. It's basically like a 30-day bus pass. You can go anywhere in the country that Greyhound goes. So they call police in Pittsburgh and ask them if they can check out the Greyhound bus station over there, and he never shows up. So they start calling different police departments around the country, letting them know we're looking for this guy. He's a white guy, short hair, light brown, blondish. He's about 6'3", probably weighs about 220 pounds. I want to say maybe less than a week later, they would catch George Anderson at the Greyhound bus station in Memphis, Tennessee. Police over there quickly apprehend him, put him in handcuffs, and they would extradite him back to West Virginia to face the triple murder charges. This is the final resting place of the Flaherty family. Now, their son, Billy Joe, he died about 12 or 13 years before the family was murdered. This is the father's stone right here. And his wife and daughter, they're buried right here. They don't have markers. I don't know why they don't have markers. I know the family, I wouldn't say that they were poor. I know the father, he had emphysema, so he was retired. He couldn't work. And I believe Pauline worked as some kind of a nurse or another, and the daughter was in school to be a nurse. So I don't know. I don't know why there wasn't any markers, but that's where they would be right here. Wheeling, West Virginia has a pretty good history when it comes to mob-related activities. You wouldn't think it by looking at this place now. But back in the 30s and the 40s, there was, I would call, a somewhat heavy-handed mob influence that permeated the air here in Wheeling, West Virginia. This is the corner of Main and 12th Street. And back in the, some would say, good old days, this was considered the busiest intersection in all of West Virginia. Now, not so much. Now, going from the 50s into the 1960s, probably the biggest gangster that controlled all of the rackets here in Wheeling, West Virginia was one Big Bill Lias. He was one of those characters that people loved and respected because you didn't want him to do something bad to you. So you didn't cross his path in a negative way. You didn't do anything that would perturb him or to upset him. And, you know, Bill Lias was loved by many people here in the Wheeling area. Not a Robin Hood figure, but definitely a man that commanded, demanded, and earned respect from common citizens alike, including those who work for the Wheeling Police Department. Now, Bill, he had his hand in gambling, bookmaking, houses of ill repute, prostitution, places of that kind of business. And he loved those illegal poker machines. And another way he used to make money is illegal jukebox machines. We're going to get into the dark history of illegal jukebox machines at a later video. So everything is going good for Big Bill Lias. He's making money hand over fist, and he has a tight grip in Wheeling, West Virginia. Well, until this two-bit thug comes moseying on down into his territory. Enter one two-bit thug, Paul Hankish. Now, he comes to Wheeling, West Virginia, and he wants a little bit of the action. He wants what Big Bill Lias has, money, and lots of it too. Now, Paul Hankish, originally he had worked with a couple of wise guys, if you will, over in Pittsburgh, and he comes to Wheeling because maybe there's less competition here. Now, back in the good old days, as some would say, usually mobsters, they had their areas, right? They had certain areas that they controlled. Now, you know, Bill Lias, he had a grip on Wheeling, but maybe that grip was not as strong as he thought it was. So Hankish comes over here and starts muscling in on his rackets, in particular the video poker machine racket. So Bill Lias, all of a sudden he gets, you know, to hear his name emanating around town. And according to most people, if you ask them back in those days, they would say that Bill Lias, he didn't care if this dude wants to just come on here and make a couple of dollars. Hey, there's plenty of room. There's plenty of money to go around everywhere, right? But we're not stupid. We know that if a guy controls an area and somebody's coming in to take some of his profits, we know that's a no-no. It's a no-no to talk to the cops, and it's a no-no to encroach on the territory of another mafiosi, if you will. Now, these mobsters in the Ohio, West Virginia areas, they're not really mafiosi, so to speak. They're not of Italian blood. They're just guys like you and me, except for these guys are hardened criminals, vicious in character, if you will. And going into the early 1960s, Hankish is building up his name in the area. Even though Wheeling is a small town, you know, back then it was a lot more bustling than it is now. So It looks like we're going to have to teach Paul a lesson, and that lesson would be taught not very far from where we're walking at right now. We're going to go back to January 17th, 1964. It's very cold here, and the streets are covered in snow. Now, at this time, Paul has just got out of prison. He's on parole right now. He's been out for about 7 months. He did a few years for fencing stolen goods, buying stolen goods. You know, when a truck gets hijacked, they steal everything out of the truck, or somebody broke into one of these homes and got a nice piece of jewelry. All that good kind of stuff. So he does a few years in the pokey. He gets out, and Paul is still up to his old tricks, but he's trying to keep a low profile. So on that morning, he gets up and has a cup of coffee, and he walks over to his 1964 tan color Studebaker. He gets into the car, puts the key into the ignition, turns it, and kaboom! The absolute loudest explosion any of these houses have ever heard just happened outside of their home. Looks like we have a car bomb. So one of the neighbors of Paul, who actually witnessed the explosion, runs up and goes to see if he's okay. Amazingly enough, this guy is still alive and he's conscious. And the neighbor remembers Paul saying, quote, "that effing Bill Lias," unquote. Looks like Big Bill Lias wants to take this guy out of the runnings for controller of Wheeling's underbelly. So this guy just had this huge bomb explode right under his feet. So basically that bomb ripped one of his legs off and basically severed the other one to where it was basically just hanging by just bone. This house right here, this is exactly right in the middle of your screen, this house. This is where the explosion happened. And all of these homes on this block, their windows are shattered. You had both the front doors of the car, when it exploded, came flying out across the street. One of the doors landed in somebody's front yard. The bumper was launched so high, it went across the street over into the backyard, no, on top of the roof of somebody's home. So they called for the paramedics, and they come out and they get Paul and they take him to the hospital. So they rush Paul to the hospital, and it's looking like he could possibly die from these injuries. So while he's at the hospital, the police, they go to his hospital room and they said, "Do you know what happened?" And he says, "that effing pig, Bill Lias." And they said, "Well, what about him?" And they said, "Are you trying to tell us that he's responsible for this bombing?" And basically he said, "Yeah." And so they're asking him, well, because they know who this dude is. So they're telling him, well, wouldn't you think it'd be somebody from Pittsburgh or maybe a mobster from Youngstown? He says, "No, I get along with everybody except that fat pig." So it was looking like for a while, Paul wasn't going to make it. They ended up amputating the other leg. The other leg is already blown off. So now he has no legs, which is why they started calling him Paul No Legs. So he ended up staying in the hospital for quite a long time. And so amazingly enough, this is the part of the story that, that people oftentimes get very infatuated with mob stories. When this guy gets out, he's a new man. And when I say a new man, it's like he became super gangster overnight. He went to the hospital with his legs blown off, just like kind of like an underworld, kind of thuggish underboss type fellow. And now he's like big man on campus. he earned a lot of respect from a lot of people in the area for him surviving the bombing. And there were rumors that he did try to hire a hitman more than a few times to take out Bill Hch, but it never happened. So eventually Bill Hch died in 1970. So Paul No Legs, he basically takes control of Wheeling. And for the next some odd amount of years, he's running the rackets in Wheeling. Now, eventually in 1990, he was indicted federally amongst many charges, racketeering, tax evasion. That's what got Al Capone. Now, here was the weird thing about the tax evasion thing and being a gangster and having gambling machines in Wheeling. You could get a tax stamp. You could get a tax stamp, tax ID number, and you could pay taxes on your gambling outfit. Now, it was illegal. You weren't allowed to do that. But oftentimes in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, if you had that tax stamp and you were paying taxes on this, on the gambling stuff, the police, yeah, they could arrest you because gambling was illegal, but they're not really gonna mess with you because you're paying taxes, you're contributing to the economy. And you know, you gotta imagine these guys were popular. These weren't, you know, what we may look at them as two big gangster thugs. These guys were quite popular. Sometimes they were looked upon as Robin Hood in some kind of weird way. I mean, they provided entertainment, they provided girls. If somebody messed with somebody that was from the area, they would take care of it. Some people would say that Wheeling was in better hands when the mob ran the city. So anyways, so Paul No Legs, Hankish, he ended up getting 33 years in prison. And he would sit and rot in prison until he died. I want to say he died in 1998. And I don't know where he's buried at. Probably somewhere here in West Virginia. Find a grave is empty, but if I wanted to, I could try to find out where he's buried. But maybe one day I will try to find that and visit his final resting spot. We're gonna go to March 6th, 1997. And 31-year-old Mark Storm, he's been away for a few days. Something was mentally wrong with him. Now, for employment, he was a riverboat captain, and he's been feeling strange for a long time. Finally, he kind of snaps and says, I need help. I need to get somewhere. I'm thinking bad thoughts. So he checks himself into the Hillcrest Behavior Health Services at the Ohio Valley Medical Center. Now, I'm not exactly sure how many days he stayed there, but he was there for a little while, a little vacation, if you will. So when he gets out, his wife picks him up and they head over to some kind of a party. It could have been a birthday party for a neighbor. And according to people that were at this party, he wasn't who they thought he would normally act like. He wasn't acting like himself, is what I'm saying. So throughout the afternoon going into the evening, he's just acting weird. So the party ends, and Mark and his wife Betty and their two kids, they went home. So when they get home, that would be the last time anybody would see the family alive. So the Storm family lived in that home right there. And on that date, March 6, 1997, Mark grabs his gun and fatally shoots his wife, 26-year-old Betty Storm. And then he goes into his kids' rooms and shoots his 8-year-old daughter, Jessica, and 3-year-old daughter Megan to death. In this house right here. Now, one thing that I do want to say about Wheeling, there is a very big drug problem here. Everywhere you go in this town, you will see some shifty people walking around just looking. They're looking at you, they're looking on the ground, they're looking at something. I'm not sure what it is they're looking for, but I'm seeing these guys looking all around them. Matter of fact, I just ran in one of them right now. And about 6 years ago, there was a very, very dangerous person on the streets here in Wheeling, West Virginia. And he looked just like that guy that I just seen, just looking for an opportunity to steal and kill to obtain money so they could buy more and more and more drugs. Back on August 3rd of 2018, the families of Trevor Voson and his girlfriend, Lauren Jenkins, they contact the Wheeling Police Department because they haven't seen either one in about 2 days. They're getting a little bit worried. Lauren was 5 months pregnant at the time with the couple's baby. So 1, 2, 3 days a week, almost 2 weeks goes by before about 160 miles down south of here in Raleigh County, some guy in some foresty area, he's foraging around to find wood to prepare himself for the winter. He goes to this site and there's like a big burn on the ground. Big burn mark. Looks like somebody was burning something. It wasn't wood that they were burning. He gets closer to this burn site and he sees what looks like a skeleton. So he runs like hell. He calls 911 and the Raleigh County Sheriffs, they come down to the scene and they discover that there's 2 dismembered corpses that somebody had tried to burn up into ash and they failed. Also in this area looks to be some tools that was used to cut up the bodies. Now they get the evidence, they take it back to the lab to see if they can get any clues off of it. They take the skeleton and they send it to the, I want to say they sent it off somewhere else, possibly the Smithsonian Institute, to see if they can find the identity of whose bodies they were. And it would come back that they in fact were Trevor Voson and his girlfriend Lauren Jenkins. So now we have a double murder. Who wanted to kill this couple so bad and just dismember them and try to hide the evidence? Well, they had a suspicion on who was responsible for the crime, but this was just rumors. Nobody would really come forward and say who was responsible. So you fast forward to the following year. So 36-year-old Gerald Wayne Jaco, him and a couple of his idiot friends, they went to go rob some kind of a gambling parlor over on the Ohio side of the river. So they break into this place, freeze, get on the ground, tie people up. Where's the money? Where's the money? They zip tie people's hands behind their backs. So they would end up making their way out of the business with about $7,000. Now, eventually, Gerald, he gets arrested and he's charged with that crime. He's an habitual offender. Guy's a hardcore drug addict. And he would eventually be sentenced to 100 years in the state prison. So later on, the law enforcement that's investigating this murder, they receive a tip saying that Jaco is responsible for the murders of Trevor and Lauren. Now, they don't have per se any kind of hardcore evidence other than the fact that they were able to get a partial fingerprint off of the tools that were used to dismember the bodies. But a partial fingerprint doesn't really tell me anything. So eventually somebody calls up the sheriff's department, or maybe it's the Wheeling Police Department, and they give them the name of somebody who had contacted, who they were in contact with, who claims that Jaco, in fact, murdered both Lauren and Trevor, and they actually helped in dismembering the body and disposing of the evidence. The voice over the telephone tells law enforcement that they're going to want to talk to 34-year-old Brendan Barber. They said, go talk to him. He knows exactly what happened. He told me that Jaco murdered the two and that he helped dispose of the bodies. So they grab Barber and they bring him into the interrogation room, and he readily admits what took place. He said it happened here on Wood Street, the same street where, of course, you guys know how I roll, that I'm walking down right now. So I'm assuming they get some kind of a search warrant, or at least permission from whoever owns the house. So they go to Wood Street right here, and they're looking for any kind of evidence of a murder being committed in the residence. So they bring in a cadaver dog, and when the dog goes into the home, it definitely hits on something. So something dead, a human body, was in that home at some point in time. Now, by this time now, I want to say it's already been about a year or so. And of course, it would be that house right there with the American flag, with the Ford Explorer Burgundy parked right in front of it. So they go into that house, and they can tell when they're looking at the floorboards, they're looking at the baseboards, they're looking at the walls. They can tell that some kind of recent construction has happened at that house right there. And so as they're looking at the walls, they can tell, if they look closely, that there's bullet holes there where people have tried to spackle over it. So they spray the luminol, you know, the stuff that makes blood kind of glow in the dark. They spray the luminol, and I want to say upstairs in a cupboard area, something along those lines, it glows like crazy. Looks like glow sticks everywhere. So eventually they contact Jaco, who's sitting on ice in prison, probably never getting out. And they hit him with the, you know, hey, tell us what happened. And at the time, his girlfriend, who was with them, they grab her too. And she confesses that Jaco, in fact, killed both Lauren and Trevor. So they're asking her, hey, do you know why he killed them? And she said, yeah, because when Jaco was in jail for something else, he thought that Trevor had stolen some stuff from him. Whatever that stuff is, I have no idea. So he had lured Trevor, who happened to bring Lauren, over here to say what's up. And that is where he shot Trevor, and I believe he shot or stabbed Lauren. So he killed both of them. His girlfriend witnessed him. I want to say he stabbed him. It could have also been a gun involved, because I remembered that the girlfriend was telling detectives that as he's stabbing Trevor, he's telling him to, quote, hurry up and die like a man. This guy is on super meth. This guy is nuts. This is the kind of psychosis that methamphetamines cause. This is why drugs are illegal. It's because of instances such as this. You're thinking that somebody stole from you. Even if he did, you're gonna just kill him. So eventually Jaco pleads guilty to both the murders, and he's sentenced to life in prison. He's never ever getting out. That's already on top of the 100 years that he's doing. So whatever time that he gets where he would see parole on that 100-year sentence, after he gets parole on that case, which he's not going to, then he has to start his life sentence. So this guy is never, ever, ever getting out of prison. He's gonna die in there. And by this time now, he's probably I don't even think he's 40 yet. And he's got a long way to go rotting in that prison, thinking about all the drugs he did and all the people's lives he destroyed over something so stupid.